Today we're jumping into part 2 of our series that we've just called Getting It Right with the People Who Matter Most. Because we all got people that matter to us and we want to get it right with them. And since we're in a series all about relationships, I actually want to just take a quick second before we jump in. I want to honor a relationship that has mattered to me. And I actually just want to bring you up to speed and bring you in on some things that our family has walked through since November, just a couple months ago. For the past 13 years, my wife Jenny, her dad, his name is Doug Parker. Doug had fought an incredibly rare kidney disease. And doctors told him that the only hope that he really had was to get a kidney transplant. And so we were incredibly grateful. About 7 years ago, he actually was able to get a kidney transplant, went into the Mayo Clinic down in Jacksonville, Florida, and got the kidney transplant. The transplant itself was successful, but then within about 48 hours or so, the signs of that disease were showing up in the new kidney. And so for years now, he's just fought so hard through all of the dialysis appointments. And if you know anyone, some of you probably know people who have gone through dialysis and week after week after week, then it's a grind. It is an absolute grind. And in mid-November, Doug called us, he called the family, and he just let us know that he was going to end going to dialysis. He was ready to be done with the grind. And most importantly, he was ready to meet God. Doug was absolutely living proof that nobody is too far gone for God's grace and forgiveness. Nobody. He would tell me stories. He actually told me stories when he was growing up, like when he was, they were doozies, all right? They made me blush. And some of the things that he got into. And after all that, though, in the middle of all that, he encountered the relentless love of Christ. And it changed him. It changed everything about him. He actually became a pastor. And he told me years ago, we were on a drive one day, and he just told me, hey, the only thing that you need to remember in reaching people is just you can find common ground with anyone. You can find common ground with everyone. And if you look for it, it's there for everyone, with everyone you meet. And that was 25 years ago that he shared that, and I've just never forgotten it. I've always tried to look for common ground. And I just say all that to say that I've been incredibly grateful for my father-in-law, and I'm so grateful that Jenny was able to head down in November and was able to be with him in his final days before he passed away on December the 8th. This is one of my favorite pictures of Jenny and her dad and Doug. And I tell you all this for just a couple reasons. A couple reasons I want to share this. One is to honor him. I just want to honor him. It was such a gift for me. I got to go down around Thanksgiving and be there with him in his final days and look him in the eyes and just tell him how much he had meant to me and how grateful I was for him in my life. I think that there is something incredibly powerful about honoring the men and women in our life who have shaped us. And I hope even today that you will send the text, or that you'll make the call, or that you'll share the words to someone that you love just to honor them. Just take advantage of that, just to honor them and tell them what they've meant to you. But I also tell you all this because I saw something in Doug happen over the years, a gift that he took advantage of. It was a gift, and this was the gift that he took advantage of. It was the gift of knowing that his days were numbered. Now listen, we all know that. Every person here, we all know our days are numbered, right? We know we're not going to live forever. We know it here, but he was just forced to face it. And it affected the way he treated the people around him. I actually love this psalm. This is right in the middle of the Bible. This is Psalm 90. And it just says this. It says, God, teach us to number our days. Why? So that we may gain a heart of wisdom. That there's wisdom in that. On the surface, this is one of the more gloomy passages in the Bible in some ways. Scholars think that Moses may have wrote this psalm. And Moses is essentially saying here, God, please remind me that my days are running out. Just remind me that my days are running out. But if you look closer at this, man, you will see the wisdom in this. Because he's reminding us that things get put in perspective when you know your days are numbered, don't they? Hugs last a little bit longer. And putting the kids down for bed doesn't have to be quite so rushed. And words carry a little bit more weight. And when you're at the end of your numbered days, which we're all going to hit at some point, I can promise this, the petty things that you get hung up on today probably just aren't going to matter that much. And Doug lived that out, and I'm just so grateful for that, and I'm so grateful to have seen that. You know, one of the burdens that I've felt for all of us as we're in this series, Getting It Right with the People Who Matter Most, is that we don't have to wait to get it right. You know, we don't have to wait to get it right with the people who matter most. It doesn't have to be a tomorrow thing. It doesn't have to be, next year I'll start to try to get it right. It doesn't have to be the end of my days kind of thing. We can get it right in our relationships today, this day. But, and here's the big sort of caveat to it all, but if we want to get it right with the people who matter most to us, there's some choices we're going to have to make. In other words, you're never going to accidentally, this is one of the premises of this series, you're never going to accidentally just drift into a great marriage. They don't happen by accident. You're not just going to drift into great work relationships. You don't accidentally end up close with your kids one day. You don't just accidentally become a great manager and leader in the workplace. Great relationships are fought for. They're fought for. They're chosen. And guys, relationships would just be so much easier if there weren't people involved, wouldn't they? Like, if the people just weren't involved, they'd be way easier. But people are involved, and people, as we learned last week, people do people-ish things. And it's those annoying, people-ish things, those frustrating, people-ish things, those hurtful, people-ish things that others do that make us want to pull back at times from others, right? And I actually just want to normalize this for a second. See, the reality is that every meaningful relationship you have, every single one, every meaningful relationship you have is eventually and inevitably going to experience some level of tension and conflict at some point. And here's why. Let me show you this graph to kind of show you why. It's because at some point, every relationship, you are going to experience a gap between your expectations in the relationship and the reality of the relationship. It's going to happen. Your expectation was that they were going to be home at 5:30, like they said. And the reality is, it's 6:17. They're not home, dinner's cold, again. It's a gap. Conflict. Your expectations were that your kid was going to be perfectly respectful and honoring to everyone in the home at all times. And then they turned 14 and reality hit. Your expectations, you told your friend, that something in confidence. You expected them to keep that between you. Reality is they talked to someone else about it. You expected the work relationships to be collaborative and helpful, and the reality is you stepped into an environment where there's all sorts of politics and backbiting. You didn't know that. I was actually thinking about this week. My first year of marriage with Jenny, it was one giant experiment of living in this gap between these two things right here, expectations and reality. I didn't know the expectation was for the shower curtain to be shut after every shower. I didn't know that. I went decades of my life never doing that. And I got along just fine. I expected to just keep hanging out with my bros after I got married, like just gaming and all that kind of stuff, right? Reality was it was time to grow up and be a man by giving my wife the first and best of my time and attention. But it created some conflict. Maybe on a little bit more serious note, Jenny expected that I'd be emotionally present for her, and the reality is I just didn't know how. And I left her isolated and alone way too much. Every single meaningful relationship you have in your life will inevitably hit moments where there is a gap between expectations and reality. And I want you to know that is normal. It's normal. This gap does not mean things are imploding. It doesn't mean that you're in the wrong workplace. It doesn't mean your child is possessed. It doesn't mean you need to ditch your friend now because they broke your trust. It doesn't mean you married the wrong person. It's normal. But when a gap erupts between expectation and reality and conflict surfaces, here's what it does mean, though. It does mean you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to have to make some decisions. And the decision is this: will we fight for the relationship or not in the middle of this gap? Will we fight for the relationship or not? And the choices we make in the gap will define whether or not we get it right. And in particular, there's three choices that we're going to talk about over these next few weeks that I think are absolutely critical to getting it right. Even when, not if, but when we experience conflict, when we experience that gap between expectations and reality. And I'll just give you the roadmap. Getting it right is going to require these three things. Number one, forgiveness. It's going to require fighting fair, and it's going to require at times healthy boundaries. These three things right here. These are critical for getting it right. When there's a gap, when there's conflict, when there's tension that arises in a relationship. This is actually the roadmap for getting it right with the people who matter most. And today, here's where I want to start. I want to start at the top of the list. I want to go camp out on that first one right there, forgiveness. We're going to talk about forgiveness. And here's why this one is at the top of the list. That's very purposeful. That's intentional. If it's true that every meaningful relationship we have is inevitably going to experience conflict, then the decision to forgive is what sets relationships that thrive apart from those that dissolve. When you read the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, again and again and again, you can't escape this. If you read the New Testament, you're going to see Jesus, he makes it clear that following him and trusting him is going to change the way you relate to other people. It makes relationships better. And as we're about to see, following Jesus, it has implications for the way we treat others, particularly when there's conflict. In fact, there was this one moment recorded for us by one of the eyewitnesses named Matthew. He walked with Jesus. He was there. And he records this moment in chapter 18 of Matthew where Jesus had been talking about this subject of conflict, particularly in relationships. And one of Jesus' followers, his name was Peter. I love Peter. Peter is so impulsive. Peter he's like a ready, fire, aim kind of guy, which I kind of relate to. And Peter just always steps up and he asks the thing that no one else is willing to ask and says the things that no one else is willing to say. And Peter hears Jesus talking about conflict and the way it affects relationships and even forgiveness. And then Peter steps up and he asks this question. I love this question. He says, then Peter came to Jesus and he asked him, hey, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? By the way, does 7 times seem random to anyone else? It's like, what are you talking about, Peter? 7 times? Not 8, not 6, 7 times? Actually, that was kind of interesting. Peter thought he was scoring some points with Jesus on this one. Because the traditional teaching in the first century of the rabbis was that you were expected to forgive someone 3 times. That actually was what was taught. 3 times. So Peter's thinking 3, carry the 1, double, that's 6. Plus 1, that's 7. Gold star, Jesus, give it to me. 7 times? Jesus is like, no gold star. Look what Jesus said. I love this. No, not 7 times, Jesus said, but 77. 70 times 7. Now, Jesus isn't trying to give Peter a math problem to figure out. This was Jesus' way of saying, there is no limit, Peter. If you're counting, you're missing the point. And then Jesus does what Jesus so often does. He tells a story to paint a picture of what forgiveness is and the price of holding on to bitterness and what it'll cost us. This is a story he told. He says, all right, let me explain it this way, Peter. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king. He's like, the kind of life I'm inviting you in on can be compared to like a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. So there's a king, Jesus says, who decides, today's the day I'm going to settle accounts. I'm going to make sure he looks over his roll, who owes him money, and at the top of the list, he finds, there's a guy who owes me millions of dollars. Now, here's the interesting thing. The average worker in the first century would make roughly $15,000 a year in the first century in today's terms. And so this guy owes him millions on a $15,000 a year salary. And here's the point. There is an insurmountable debt that this man owes the king that he cannot pay back and will never be able to pay back. But that doesn't stop the man who owes this money from making an appeal. This is what the man says. He comes before the king. The man fell down before his master and he begged him. He says, please be patient with me and I'll pay it all. Not true. But I'll try my best at least. Then his master, listen to this, listen to his response. Then his master was filled with pity for him. And he what? Released him and forgave his debt. There is no way this man could pay it back. And the king knows this. And now there's a gap. There's a conflict. He expected the man to pay what he was owed. And the reality is he can't. And in the middle of that conflict, he does something absolutely remarkable. He forgave him. He forgave him. Now, in just a moment, Jesus is about to take this story in a direction that no one saw coming. We'll get to that. But before we get there, let's just pause for a second. Let's talk about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. Let's talk first about what forgiveness is. This story that Jesus tells gives actually, I think, a perfect image of what forgiveness is, a definition. The man has taken something from the king, right? The king is owed something in return as a result, but the king decides to what? Cancel the debt that the man owes him. Forgiveness is a perfect definition of forgiveness. Forgiveness is at its core, it's canceling the debt that someone owes you. You know, anytime that you and I are wronged, anytime we're wronged, there's something that's been taken from us. So we are owed a debt. I've got all these receipts up here. And how many of you gotten a receipt at CVS before? Why do they got to do that? Anyways, I got all these receipts. Sorry, soapbox. And you know what receipts are? I mean, in so many ways, receipts are just records of what was owed. I mean, at the end of the day, right? It's a record of what was owed. It's almost like a tab that's been run up, and it's a record of what I owed the store because of what I took out of it. Anytime we're wronged by someone else, any offense that's done to us, big or small, CVS long receipt or this, right? Big or small, we're now owed something because something was taken, which means anytime we're wrong, we now have a receipt that we can hold as serves almost as a record of the debt owed because of what they took. This could be, again, big or small. When someone lies to you, what did they take from you? They took your trust. They made you look stupid. They took your respect. For some of you, you felt this. Someone took your parking spot at the mall during the holidays. They took something from you. They saw your turn signal. Don't act like you didn't, right? They took your time and they wasted it. They took the lead that you had been working on for months, and then they came up underneath you and got the sale, but they took it from you. They took the money. They took the kids in the settlement. You don't see them anymore. They took your innocence. Long time ago. And my point is that when we've been wronged, something has been taken from us. And a debt is owed. And like the king in the story, forgiveness is the willing decision on our part not to make the other person pay back. Let me tell you what forgiveness is not. This is so important. Forgiveness is not excusing what someone did. It's not making light of it. It's not pretending like it didn't happen. What did the king do? The king called the man's debt out, didn't he? It said he called him to account. The king didn't pretend like you didn't owe him anything, like he didn't owe him anything. He said, no, you owe me millions. See, the very nature of forgiveness is calling out the wrong that was done. In other words, you cannot forgive someone unless you have first declared what they did to be what? Wrong and worthy and deserving of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not excusing or making light of the wrong someone did. Another thing forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not dependent on the other person asking for it. Man, this is so important. If forgiveness is a decision that we make personally, it's a choice we make, it's not dependent on the other person. And for some of you, guys, let's think about this. For some of you, the person who hurt you the most, they passed away a long time ago. How are you ever going to move on if this requires them to say sorry? For some of you, the person who hurt you, they've moved away a long time ago. And so if we need them to say sorry or confess something, we're still putting them in control of our life and spiritual well-being. Forgiveness is not dependent on the other person doing anything. It's a choice we make. I would say forgiveness is not, here's the third thing, forgiveness is not the same as reconciling. Man, this is so big. Some people are toxic. And someone needs to hear that today. Some people are dangerous. And to forgive means that you release them from having to pay you back. It does not mean you've got to run back to them. Some of you were told, and this is why this is a little bit of a soapbox for me on this, because some of you were told by other Christians years ago that if you really forgave someone who hurt you, then you'd go back to the relationship. No. That relationship was abusive. That relationship was toxic. I'm sorry, forgiveness, and I want you to know, I'm sorry you were told that. Reconciliation and forgiveness are not the same thing in the Bible. They're two different things. Reconciliation takes two people, and the other person has to be agreeable to it. I'd say the last thing is this. Forgiveness is not releasing them, the people who've hurt us at times, from facing consequences. It's not releasing them from that. And I want to say that because sometimes yeah, but I don't know. I just feel like I'm letting them on. No. Forgiveness is a decision that you make to free them from the responsibility of paying you back personally. However, there might be very real legal, civil consequences to what the person did, and you can forgive someone and still allow them to face the consequences of their action. Are we tracking on all this? I just want to make this real clear because this stuff gets real muddy. Forgiveness, let's go back to our definition. Forgiveness is the willing decision on our part not to make the other person pay us back. We're not going to turn in the receipts. And see, this is what makes forgiveness so painful. This is why it's so difficult. Because when you forgive someone, the debt doesn't go away, does it? That king was still owed all that money. These receipts don't go away just because you forgive them. we just release the person from having to pay us back for it. So when we forgive, we absorb the debt. Which begs a really honest question. Then why forgive at all? Because that feels painful. And Jesus actually answered that question by going on to finish the story. And he says something at the end of the story. I'm telling you, as you're going to see in a moment, it is about as jarring as anything you will ever see Jesus say. This is how Jesus finished the story. He says, but when the man left the king, so remember, this is the man who's been forgiven how much? Millions. When that man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. And he grabbed him by the throat and he demanded instant payment. So the man who was forgiven all those millions of dollars that he's owed, he goes right out to demand that someone who owes him a couple $1,000s pales in comparison, right? He says, you pay up immediately. The guy who he went to, he begs for patience. He uses the same exact words that the other man used, by the way. And he says, please be patient with me. I'll pay it all back. But the man who's been forgiven, he refuses to forgive the debt. He had this man thrown into prison. There's a group of people watching. They saw all of this. And this is what it says, Jesus says happened. It says, when some of the other servants saw this, they were upset. They went to the king. They told him everything that had happened. The king called in the man that he had forgiven and said, you evil servant, I forgave you. I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. Now, at this moment, Jesus is done telling the story. And I don't know if Jesus, he gets done telling the story at this point. I don't know if he just lets it be quiet for a second. But then Jesus adds one little statement of commentary that explains this. This is what Jesus says next. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. Now that's sobering. And it should be. Because Jesus is saying, you can choose to live a life of bitter resentment, always holding on to the receipts that you're owed until you get paid back in full. But if you do, you are walking straight into your own prison. You're walking straight into your own prison. Some of us are locked up today. Some of us are here right now, we're locked up. We are carrying around receipts that we will never get paid back for. We're carrying them everywhere we go. And they're weighing on us. And we've had a lot of expectations that did not line up with reality. So we have some conflicts, and some of our receipts are real long, and some of them are from years ago, and some of them are from today already, and they're real short. But we've been keeping hold of all these receipts. And we've been passively putting the other person who did these things to us, like in timeout. They don't know it. We put them in timeout. Withholding from them, cutting them out, lashing out at times, demanding they pay one way or the other. But see, here's the thing. Here's why refusing to forgive and just holding on to all of our receipts becomes a prison, like Jesus describes. How can someone ever pay you back for trust that was taken? How can they pay you back for that? How can someone pay you back for time that they took from you? You can't get it back. How can someone give you back your innocence? You're never getting it back. Or respect that they took from you. These are not things you can get back. So if we tie up our own future into their hands, demanding they pay us back, who's stuck? It's us. And even worse, and maybe most tragic, when we refuse to forgive, the other people close to us end up getting hit with the shrapnel of our resentment for the things that someone else did. We don't trust the people around us, even though it was someone years ago that broke your trust. But the people today suffer. We withhold from others now because someone else took advantage of us, and it was a long time ago. We had an overbearing parent years ago, and so we decided to rebel. We're going to make them pay. We're going to turn our receipt in. We're going to make them pay. We'll rebel. We'll do everything opposite of what you told me to do. And you did it. You got them back. You made them pay. But by doing that, you've actually allowed them to still be in control of your life. Because you want let go of the receipts you're holding on to. And as Jesus is about, he's about as crystal clear as you can possibly get on this. He says, if you want to get it right in life, if you want to get it right in relationships that matter most, your decision to forgive or not will be the linchpin that unlocks that possibility. See, remember, all of this was a response to Peter's really simple question, how often should I forgive someone? And Jesus responds by saying, well, I don't know, that depends. What kind of life do you want? What kind of life do you want? What kind of relationships do you want? Because if you want a life of freedom, unburdened from carrying around all those receipts all the time until people pay up, it's not going to be 3 times. It's not even going to be 7 times. It's more like, 70 times 7. There is no limit. You got to keep choosing again and again. I actually love the ways that the first followers of Jesus talked about this choice as they considered the implications for their lives. Listen to this. This is in Colossians chapter 3. It says, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, listen to this, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. You know what I love about this? It's so simple to me. You choose each day what to wear. Good job today, by the way. Y'all look great, right? But you choose we all know that winter in Pennsylvania, it's really just a choice as to which flannel we're going to put on, right? But we choose every single day. We go to our closet, we open up our drawers, right? What am I going to wear today? Actually, this is kind of funny. Someone actually asked me at one of our Christmas gatherings a few weeks ago, they go, hey, I'm not sure how to ask you this, but did you pick out your outfit or did Jenny do that? I was like, what does that even mean? I was like, I chose with Jenny's help. I chose. Anyways, but we all choose, right? I want you to think about this for a second. How we show up in relationships is a choice, like putting on an outfit. It's not based on how we feel at the moment. We choose how we show up in a relationship, like we choose what to wear. We choose the relational outfits that we'll put on every day. And then it says this next, getting to our point. So make this choice. Make allowances for each other's faults. And there's our word. And forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Where in the world could any of us find the ability to keep choosing forgiveness when we're hurt and wronged? Like, where does that come from? And Paul, the guy who wrote this, says, I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from remembering. Remembering what? Remembering just how much you've been forgiven by God. See, I would expect maybe this passage to say this. Look, you should forgive others because God has forgiven them. But see, if that were the reason, if that were the motivation for us to forgive others, how easy would it be to go, well, of course, God's God, I'm not. So I'll let God forgive them. I'll hold on to my receipts. Thank you very much. Until they pay me back. Nope, that's not what it says. The point isn't that we forgive others because God's forgiven them. The point is that we forgive others because God has forgiven us. Jesus is saying, you cannot look within to find the source of forgiveness of others. That well is too shallow in my life. You have to look outside yourself. Where? At the cross. And what Jesus did for you. Because on the cross, we are reminded that there are not containers. There aren't containers large enough to hold all of the receipts that we owe God. There aren't screens big enough to hold all the receipts that we owe to God. See, you know the man that I resonate most with in that story? It was the guy who had all the debt. I get that guy because I owe millions and millions and millions to the King. I know the people I've lied to. I know them. I know all the ways I've used people. I know all the selfish motives that I've lived with. I know the regrets that come from one too many drinks. I know the words that hurt that I've said, and that was just one weekend in my early 20s. And I've had 1,000 more times since that I've walked away where I knew Jesus was leading me to go. I know the debt I've racked up. Have you ever considered that if there is truly a perfect and holy God, the debt we must have racked up along the way? is a debt we could never repay. You will never be able to repay it. So our great King did what you could never do. He paid it. He absorbed the cost. He marked every debt we owe as paid, covered by his work on the cross. And when we truly understand just how much we've been forgiven, it does not make forgiving others easier. It doesn't make any of this easier, but it just puts it in perspective. As I look at the receipts I've been handed, and then I look at the ones that I've racked up, and what I've been forgiven, it doesn't compare. In light of all that I've owed and all I've been forgiven, who am I to go and make everyone else around me pay up? Do you want to get it right with the people who matter most? We're going to have to choose to forgive. We're going to have to choose to forgive. We're not going to live in the prison of our own making anymore. We're going to leave here different. We're not going to hold on to receipts and hold them over people anymore. We're going to live free. We're going to live empowered by the Spirit of God, that we will not allow hurt we face from others to keep us stuck in bitterness and resentment. We're going to look at the cross. That's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the cross, and in light of just how much we've been forgiven, we're going to choose forgiveness again and again and again, 70 times 7 if need be. So I just want to ask you, are there any receipts that you're holding on to today? It's time to let go. It's time to let go. It's time to be freed from that. Big one, small one, doesn't matter. Are there any receipts? Is there anyone that comes to mind right now that you just need to forgive? A parent? A kid? A spouse? A boss? A friend? It's time to release them from having to pay you back and allow God to deal with them. And then again tomorrow, you'll have to do it again maybe, and then the next day, whatever it takes, because we just refuse to be held in the prison of our own making. We're not going there. We're going to be freed. And if you have a situation or a person right now in mind, let me just encourage you, maybe just pray this prayer right now. I'll give you some space to pray it. But I think this is a prayer to pray. Just say, Jesus, what they did was wrong. Remember, you're not skirting it. You're not excusing it. You're not pretending it didn't happen. Jesus, what they said to me was wrong. Jesus, what they did to undercut me, that was wrong. Jesus, the disrespect, that was wrong. Call it what it is. It was wrong. It was wrong. Jesus, what they did was wrong, and, not but, and it was wrong. And in light of how you've forgiven me, I forgive them. Tell them right now, I forgive them. And I release them from having to pay me back. You might have to pray that prayer again in an hour, or tomorrow, or the next day. Jesus said it's worth it. It's worth it. Don't get stuck in a prison. Don't get locked in a prison. He says, trust me on this. And you'll get it right in relationships. I would love to pray for us. Heavenly Father, I know that there's some of us who are here today. Well, I mean, every one of us has experienced conflict. We've all experienced some hurt, a gap between expectations and reality in relationships. For some of us, that list is real long. For some of us, that list is short, but it doesn't matter. We all come in with it. God, if there are people in our lives today that we just need to let go, we need to release, we need to forgive, I pray that you give us the strength and the courage right now to trust you and do that. I pray, Jesus, that you free us from the prison of our own making when we hold on to receipts. God, we hand those receipts over to you right now. We hand them over to you. We hand them over to you. And we ask you to take them from us. We ask you to free us. We want to live free. We want to walk out of here more free. So empower us to live with forgiveness in mind. Because we want to get it right with the people who matter most. And Jesus, we thank you that our motivation for that is not a rule, it's not religion. Our motivation and our drive for that is rooted in the reality of what you've done for us. You have forgiven us millions. An insurmountable debt. You decided to absorb the cost to bring us back into a personal relationship with you. And we are so grateful for that. So allow that to settle in on our hearts so that we live more free to forgive others. And we pray all of this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Let's get it right. Let's get it right with the people who matter most by making the choice this week to walk in the freedom of forgiveness. If there's anything that you'd like to pray about today, feel free to come up left all of our buildings, all of our rooms right now. We'd be honored to pray with you. You can always leave a prayer request on our website or in the chat as well. Hey, next week, let me just tell you real quick, next week we're going to get super practical. We're going to discover how to step into a tough conversation with people who matter to you. You ever had to have a tough conversation with someone that mattered to you? We're going to discover how we can be relentlessly honest and honoring at the same exact time. Until then, LCBC, may the Lord bless and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next week.